Let me take you back to a time when everything seemed normal. Back when we looked like just another couple, living the usual life. We'd been married for 3 years, and things were good. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, a lot of moments blur together. Like our first vacation, staying at that rundown seaside motel, or buying our house, which we swore would be the one we'd grow old in. She and I had our routines. Coffee in the morning, random talks about work, or what we might do over the weekend. We felt like we understood each other, or at least we tried to. Sure, deep down there were probably things we both ignored. But there was always this one thing lingering, hanging over us. The topic of kids, and more specifically, her wanting them. Every time it came up, I'd shut it down. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I couldn't be. What she didn't know, though, was why. I never told her, not even after I turned 18, that I made a choice that changed everything. I decided to get a vasectomy. Call it teenage rebellion, or whatever you want. But I promised myself I'd never bring a child into this world to relive the nightmare of my own upbringing. I'd seen enough to swear off fatherhood forever. So, as our marriage went on, every time she hinted at wanting kids, I found a way to deflect. Not yet, babe. Or, let's focus on our careers first. There was always an excuse ready. She'd complain now and then, sure, but she usually dropped it, at least for the time being. I guess I got good at dodging the conversation. Until one night, the bombshell dropped. We were having one of those quiet dinners at home. You know the kind, nothing fancy, just the two of us. Out of nowhere, she looks at me, all bright-eyed and grinning, and says, "I'm pregnant." Just like that. No warning, no lead-up. She was waiting for me to react like I just heard the best news in the world. And I should have, if things were normal. But they weren't. The second those words left her mouth, my mind just went blank. And then, like a punch to the gut, I realized there was no way that kid could be mine. Let me tell you, it's one thing to have a gut feeling that something's off, but to have it shoved in your face like that, that's a whole different story. I tried to keep it cool, faking a smile and nodding along, but inside, I felt like the floor was about to give out from under me. She kept going on about how excited she was, how she couldn't wait for us to be a family, talking about baby names and our future like it was all set in stone. Meanwhile, I just sat there, feeling like a total fool, trapped in my own home. I had this wave of rage building up, confusion eating at me, and this hollow feeling in my chest that just wouldn't go away. After that night, things started to stand out in a way they hadn't before. Little things, like how she always kept her phone face down on the table, how she'd get texts late at night and brush them off like they were nothing, just work stuff, or how she started spending more time out with her friends, only to come home smelling like she'd just been at a club. I knew I had to find out what was really going on, or if I was just being paranoid. And let me tell you, paranoia can mess with your head. You start overthinking every word, every action. So, I did what anyone would do. I started paying close attention. When she wasn't around, I'd grab her phone and scroll through her messages. She had a passcode, which was already weird since we used to share everything. But one night, when she was in the shower, I figured it out. Of all things, it was our wedding anniversary. How cliché. So I started scrolling like my life depended on it. There was nothing obvious at first, just a bunch of texts from random numbers I didn't recognize. They seemed harmless at first, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I felt like a detective in one of those movies, only, trust me, it's not nearly as glamorous as it looks. The deeper I dug, the more this sick feeling in my stomach grew, telling me that I was about to find something I wasn't ready for. She acted so normal around our friends, laughing, holding my hand, like everything was fine. But to me, every laugh felt forced, every touch seemed fake. I couldn't even look at her without questioning everything we'd built. When she wasn't around, I searched through her stuff, the closet, the drawers, her laptop, anything that might give me some clue as to what was really going on. I knew it was crazy, and part of me hated myself for doing it, but I felt like I was losing my mind. Meanwhile, she was prancing around like she was the perfect wife, completely unaware that I was piecing together this twisted puzzle. Or maybe she knew, and she just didn't care. And then there were the phone calls, random calls at strange hours. She'd step out of the room to take them, speaking in hushed tones like she didn't want me to hear. Every time that happened, I felt like I was about to snap. I thought about confronting her then and there, snatching the phone, demanding answers, but I couldn't. I had no proof, just this gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that I was still trying to act normal, or the fact that the tension between us was growing thicker every day. It all came to a head one night when she was asleep, and I was lying there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay, but I wasn't ready to face whatever truth was waiting for me. So I did what I knew best. I waited, watched, listened for that one moment where everything would fall into place. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could prove myself wrong. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. I knew the storm was coming, and I wasn't sure either of us would make it through unscathed. So after days of living in this twisted charade, I decided enough was enough. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when I was suffocating in doubt and anger. I needed answers. No more games, no more avoiding the truth. Whatever that truth turned out to be. It was late when I heard her humming in the kitchen, the sound floating through the quiet house. She was cleaning the dishes, and I walked in, trying to act like everything was normal, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I was sure my face gave me away before I even opened my mouth. She looked at me, smiling that smile that once made everything feel right. But now? Now it was just a knife in my side. "Hey babe, what's up?" she asked, all casual, like it was just another ordinary night. But I knew this was no ordinary night. I was about to say something that would shatter everything. I tried to ease into it, asking how she was feeling about the pregnancy, if she had thought about seeing a doctor, what her next steps were. You know, just trying to keep it light. But she was so damn calm. She just went on and on, talking about baby names, what the nursery would look like, even how our families would celebrate. It was like she was living in some perfect little fantasy. All while I sat there, fuming, barely holding it together. She didn't seem to notice the tension creeping up in the air between us. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend to be the loving husband when every word she said made my anger boil over. So I took a breath, trying to steady myself, and asked the question I'd been holding in for so long. "Are you sure? Are you really sure this is our baby?" Her face froze. She stopped talking, and I saw a mix of confusion, anger, and maybe a little bit of fear flash across her face. She didn't know what to do with it. "What do you mean?" "Of course it's ours," she snapped, her voice defensive. "Why would you even ask that?" I swallowed hard, but I knew what I had to say. "I need to know if there's someone else," I said, the words coming out like I was pulling them from deep inside me, like I was dragging them through thick mud. I tried to keep it calm, tried not to make it sound like an accusation, but who was I kidding? It was. And she knew it too. Her reaction was instant. "How could you say that?" she shouted, her voice cracking. "You think I'd cheat on you? You think I'd sleep with some random guy and get pregnant? That's what you think of me." Tears welled up in her eyes as she slammed the dishcloth on the counter, her hands shaking with rage. I don't even know what to think anymore. I didn't back down. "None of this makes sense. You expect me to just trust you when I know for a fact I can't have kids? You think I'm just supposed to believe this is mine?" The silence between us felt like an eternity. Then, the truth that had been hanging in the air like a dark cloud just broke free. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "I got a vasectomy years ago, before we even met. I can't have kids, and that means this kid isn't mine." Have you ever seen someone's whole world fall apart right in front of you? That's what it felt like in that moment. She stood there, frozen, staring at me, her face going pale. The room was so still, it felt like we were underwater. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd deny it, spin some lie, try to cover it all up. But instead, she just broke. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, pulling at her hair like she was trying to pull the truth out of herself. "You lied to me," she cried between sobs. "You took that choice away from me. You never told me. Not once. How could you do that to me? You knew I wanted a family. You knew I wanted kids and you lied." And for a second, I almost felt like I was the villain here. Like I was the one who'd betrayed her. But then I remembered who was pregnant with another man's child. It wasn't me. So I didn't back off. You had a choice too, I said, my voice rising, the anger I'd been holding and spilling out. You made that choice. Just once. That's all it took. And now look at this mess. And then she admitted it. It was one time, she screamed, her tears flowing freely now. One stupid night. And I didn't think it would happen. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The weight of it hit me like a freight train. All those nights I'd been lying awake, all that paranoia, all that gut feeling, it was all true. She'd slept with someone else, and now she was carrying his child. My stomach turned, like I was going to vomit up everything that had been festering inside me. One time, I sneered, my voice thick with disbelief. One time, and you just happened to get pregnant. What did you think would happen? That I'd never find out? That I'd just play dad to some random guy's kid and pretend everything was fine? I couldn't even look at her. When I looked at her, all I saw was a stranger wearing my wife's face. She just kept crying, muttering apologies, but it didn't mean anything anymore. I didn't know how to tell you, she blubbered. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. None of it mattered. None of it could change what had happened. I'm done, I said flatly, drained of any emotion. Done with the lies, the secrets, all of it. This was never real. I'm filing for divorce. I turned around, not even looking back. I could hear her calling after me, crying, begging me to stay, to talk it out. But there was nothing left to talk about. She broke us. And now, I was just walking away from the wreckage. I slammed the car door shut and just sat there, gripping the wheel, my knuckles turning white. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was supposed to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't be near her. It felt like the whole world had just crumbled, and I had no idea how to start putting it back together. I didn't even know what came next. All I knew was that it was over, and I had no idea where to go, no idea what to do with myself. I was just lost. Eventually, I knew I had to find my own space, somewhere that didn't reek of pity or memories of us. So I ended up in a crappy one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't much. White walls, creaky floors. The kind of place where the neighbors don't even bother to say hi. But it was mine. And it was the one place where I didn't have to see her face every day. I didn't have to deal with the ghost of our life together. I wish I could say moving out brought me peace, some sense of closure. But the truth? It was hell. Every morning I woke up with this hollow feeling gnawing at me, this pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I couldn't even look at my reflection without feeling like a total failure. I was the guy who couldn't hold his marriage together, the guy who let himself get blindsided. And then there was the anger, that constant, gnawing anger, at her, at myself, at everything. It was like a weight on my chest, suffocating me every damn day. And then, of course, there was the guilt. You'd think it'd all be on her, right? After all, she's the one who cheated, the one who lied, the one who turned our lives into a wreck. But there was a part of me that felt guilty too. Too guilty for not telling her about the vasectomy sooner. I kept thinking, if I'd just been upfront from the start, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe she wouldn't have felt betrayed by my secret. Maybe I wouldn't be left picking up the pieces of a life that wasn't mine anymore. And it didn't help that everything reminded me of her, of us. I'd be making breakfast and remember how she used to burn half the pancakes on Sundays, pretending she didn't. Or I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the loneliness would hit me like a wave, dragging me under as I thought about the nights we used to talk about everything and nothing. Even the smallest things, like catching a glimpse of her favorite movie on TV, would send me spiraling back into this whirlwind of regret and what-ifs. I tried to throw myself into work, thinking maybe it would help me move on. But I couldn't focus. Every email, every meeting, every project felt pointless. How could I care about work when my whole world had collapsed? I'd stare at my computer screen, barely processing anything, and end up scrolling through old photos on my phone. Like some kind of masochist, torturing myself with pictures of smiles and happy moments that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. And then there were the friends. The ones who tried to be there for me, even when they had no idea what to do. They'd text, check in, invite me out for beers, try to get me to come watch a game, hoping to pull me out of the pit I was stuck in. And for a while, I went along with it. putting on a fake smile and pretending I was having a good time. But the more I hung out with them, the more I realized they couldn't understand what I was going through. How could they? They were either happily married or single, living their best lives. No wife blindsiding them with infidelity, no kid that wasn't theirs. And the mutual friends? The ones who knew both of us, who had seen us at our best and worst. Most of them sided with her, or at least didn't choose my side. They'd send me texts like, "Sorry to hear what happened," or "Hope you're holding up okay." But it all felt hollow, empty. And to be honest, I couldn't stand the idea of seeing them again. Knowing they'd look at me with those pity-filled eyes, knowing they were probably just as clueless as I had been. So I cut ties. I let go of those mutual friendships, the people who were too tied up with her, too tied up in what we used to be. It felt like cutting off pieces of myself, parts of my past, but it was the only way I could start moving forward, or at least try to. Nights were the worst, though. That's when everything came crashing down. The silence of that apartment? It was suffocating, like it was closing in on me. So I'd pour myself a drink or two, or three, hoping it would drown out the thoughts, hoping for just a moment of peace. But it never really worked. The numbness would fade, and I'd be right back where I started, staring at the ceiling, going over every fight, every lie, every moment I should have noticed, wondering when things went wrong, wondering if there was ever a chance to stop it. Eventually, I tried to get back into some of the things I used to love. Playing guitar, going for runs, the stuff that used to make me feel alive. But it didn't feel the same. It was like the joy had been sucked out of everything. All I had left was this nagging feeling of, what's the point? I felt like I was just going through the motions, trying to find some version of normal in a life that had lost all meaning. I remember sitting in a park one day, watching people pass by, families with kids, couples holding hands, friends laughing, and feeling like I was watching it all from the outside, like I was some kind of ghost in my own life. I wanted to feel normal again, to look at the world without this constant ache. But I couldn't. All I could think about was how everything I thought I knew was gone, and I had no clue who I was supposed to be anymore. And then there was trust, or rather, the lack of it. Every time I thought about meeting someone new, about trying to put myself out there again, it felt impossible. How could I ever trust anyone again? How could I let myself be vulnerable, knowing it could all come crashing down again? I gave everything to my marriage, and look where that got me. No matter how much time passed, it felt like I'd never be able to let my guard down again. Never be able to believe in something good without expecting it to blow up in my face. But I guess that's what happens when you've been burned. You start seeing shadows where there are none. You start expecting every smile to have an agenda, every touch to hide some secret. And honestly, I hated that part of myself. I hated becoming this bitter, paranoid mess who couldn't look at the world without assuming the worst. But what was I supposed to do? After everything, after the lies, the betrayal, the wreckage of what used to be my life. What other choice did I have? So, that became my life after the divorce. A constant tug-of-war between wanting to move on and being dragged back into the darkness of my own mind. I was trying to reclaim pieces of myself, to find a version of me that wasn't defined by her deceit. Some days felt like progress, sure, but most days I was just existing, barely. Trying to figure out who I was now that she wasn't part of the equation. Trying to figure out how to live with the scars she left. Months passed, and things started to calm down, at least a little. Time did that, I guess. It has a way of dulling even the sharpest pain. And for the first time in a while, it felt like I was surfacing for air, like I hadn't been drowning for so long. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but at least it didn't feel like the weight of the world was crushing me every second of the day. I started to go out again, reconnecting with parts of my life I'd long shoved away. It was slow, awkward at first, like learning to walk again after years of crawling. One night, after work, I ended up at this little bar near my apartment. It wasn't much, dark, with old wooden tables and a jukebox that sounded more like a dying radio than anything worth listening to. But it was perfect for that night. It was comfortable in a way that made me feel like I wasn't being watched or judged. I could sit by myself, nurse a drink, and not feel like the world was staring at me, waiting for me to fall apart. I was zoning out, half watching some baseball game on TV that I couldn't care less about when she walked in. She caught my attention, not because she was this knockout, but because she was real. Just a woman on her own, probably looking for the same escape I was. She sat a couple stools away from me, and we exchanged a brief nod. Nothing more, just a simple acknowledgement. But it felt like the most genuine connection I'd had in months. I don't even remember how we started talking. Probably something trivial, like the weather or the bad music playing in the background or the overpriced drinks. But we talked, and it didn't feel forced. It wasn't like all those conversations with people who knew what I was going through and tried to fix me with their pity. She didn't know my past, and I didn't know hers. And that was the best part. There was no pressure, no hidden expectations. Just two people talking about life, music, and whatever random thoughts popped into our heads. Her name was Allison. She had this warm laugh that made you feel like you belonged, like you were part of something better than you had been. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. Not that fake laugh I'd been giving everyone, pretending I was okay, but a real, honest laugh. And damn, it felt good. One drink turned into two, then three. I wasn't trying to get wasted, but for the first time in ages, I allowed myself to just relax. I stayed longer than I planned. We kept talking until the bar closed, talking about absolutely nothing, yet everything. And when we finally walked out of there, I felt lighter, like I'd left a little of my anger, my hurt, behind. That night, we exchanged numbers, and for the first time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't worry about where this might lead or what it might mean. I just knew I wanted to see her again, to talk to her again, to feel something good in my life, even if only for a while. The next few weeks were a blur of cautious first steps, coffee dates, walks through the park, quiet dinners at tiny little restaurants where we could talk without anyone around us expecting something. We didn't dive into heavy conversations about the past. We didn't go digging into each other's histories. And honestly, that was perfect for me. I was still too broken, too scared to open up about what I'd been through, and she seemed perfectly content to just be. No pressure, no expectations. I remember one night, we sat on a bench overlooking the city. The lights below twinkled like little stars, and we were just talking about whatever, with no direction, no agenda. Then, she reached out and took my hand. It was so simple, so small, but it felt like a huge moment. Like maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. Maybe I could stop being afraid of getting hurt. But that fear, that damn fear, it never fully left. It was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. The vasectomy. That damn vasectomy. It was like this invisible wall between me and anything real, anything lasting. Because no matter how good things were with Allison, no matter how much I just wanted to enjoy the moment, I knew the day would come when I'd have to tell her. I'd have to say the words that ruined my marriage. And I couldn't help but wonder, would it ruin this too? Every time we got close, every time we shared a laugh or a quiet moment, something always crept back into my mind. What if she wants kids? What if that's a deal breaker for her? What if she looks at me the same way my ex did, with that disappointed look, like I was lying to her, like I had stolen her chance at something she wanted? But despite all those fears, despite everything inside me telling me to keep my distance, I found myself opening up to Allison. Slowly, little by little, I started letting her into the parts of me I'd kept buried for so long. She'd ask about my day, my work, my life. And without realizing it, I'd tell her things I hadn't shared with anyone since the divorce. She listened, really listened. She never pushed me, never made me feel like I had to say more than I was ready for. It was like she understood that I was still figuring myself out, still trying to rebuild from the wreckage of everything that had happened. We'd go for walks, talking about anything and everything. The dumbest stuff, like our favorite movies, the worst jobs we'd ever had, or what we'd do if we won the lottery. And with every step, hand in hand, I started to see a future I hadn't dared to imagine in a long time. Not a bleak, lonely future, but one where there was some hope, some light. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for me to find happiness again. But there was still that damn secret. Every day that passed without telling her felt like I was building a wall between us. A wall made of lies, brick by brick. And I hated it. Hated the weight of something so big hanging over us, knowing it could change everything. But how could I tell her? How could I risk losing the only thing good that had come out of all this mess? One night, after dinner, we were sitting on the couch, wrapped up in each other. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second, I thought maybe it wouldn't matter. Maybe she wouldn't care. But then the fear came rushing back. That voice in my head screaming at me to keep quiet, to keep everything just like it was for a little while longer. Because once the truth was out, there would be no going back. No more pretending. No more pretending that we were in this little bubble where everything was fine. So I kept quiet. I kept telling myself I'd tell her tomorrow, or the next day, or the one after that. And in the meantime, we kept building this thing between us. This fragile, beautiful thing that felt like it could actually be something real. I knew I couldn't keep hiding the truth forever. I knew that eventually, I'd have to face it. I'd have to face her and find out if this was something worth holding on to, or just another chapter in the mess that was my life. But for now, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I couldn't keep dodging it forever. It was eating me alive. That secret kept clawing at me every time I looked at her. Every time we laughed, held hands, kissed. The longer I put it off, the more I felt like I was building this relationship on something false, something that could come crashing down at any moment. I'd been carrying that weight for months, feeling like a fraud, and I couldn't stand it anymore. It was time to tell her. I had to do it before I lost my nerve. So, one Friday night, I decided to make it right. I planned a special dinner, nothing fancy, just my best attempt at cooking something that wouldn't burn. I set the table, lit a couple of candles, and tried to keep myself from spiraling into a panic attack. I must have rearranged those damn forks a dozen times, just to have something to do with my hands, something to distract me from what I was about to do. Allison showed up, smiling like she always did, and I forced myself to smile back. She immediately noticed something was off. She could always read me like a book. "You okay?" she asked, her gaze sharp, like she was already figuring me out. I told her I was fine, that I just wanted to make tonight special, that there was something we needed to talk about. She looked a little nervous, but she didn't push it. She trusted me, and that almost made it harder to do what I had to do. Dinner was a blur. I couldn't tell you what we ate or what we talked about. I was too lost in my own head, rehearsing the words, trying to figure out how to say what needed to be said without wrecking everything. Eventually, I couldn't put it off any longer. We'd finished eating, and the silence between us felt so thick, so heavy. I could feel the weight of everything I hadn't told her. "I need to tell you something," I finally said, my voice shaky. I could see the concern in her eyes, the way she braced herself for whatever was coming next. "It's not easy for me to talk about, but you deserve to know the truth." And with that, I told her everything. I told her about the vasectomy I'd had when I was 18, how it felt like the only way to escape the mess of my childhood, how it had been a decision made out of fear, anger, desperation, really. I told her how I'd kept it hidden from my ex, how it had led to the lies that tore my marriage apart. I told her everything, how that secret had torn my life apart, how it had destroyed my marriage. I told her how terrified I was, afraid that she'd see me differently, that she'd feel betrayed, that she'd walk away, just like my ex-wife had. I sat there, waiting for her to react, to say something, anything, but she didn't. She just sat there, eyes locked on mine. I couldn't read her expression. I had no idea what she was thinking, and that uncertainty, that silence, it terrified me more than anything else. When I finally finished, I felt like I had ripped open my chest, exposing everything, raw and vulnerable, just waiting for her to tear me apart. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. That simple gesture nearly shattered me. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice calm, steady. "I know that wasn't easy for you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still bracing for the worst. For her to pull away, to say this was a deal breaker. But then she smiled. A soft, reassuring smile that felt like coming home. "It doesn't change anything," she said. "I care about you, and I want to be with you. I've always dreamed of having a family," she continued. But that doesn't mean biological kids. There are other ways. Adoption, fostering, or maybe it's just the two of us. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. All the fear, all the insecurity I'd been carrying for so long, started to melt away. I was overwhelmed with relief, grateful for her understanding, for her openness, for the fact that she saw me for who I was and not just the sum of my past mistakes. I pulled her close and held her tight. For the first time in years, I felt like everything was going to be okay. From that night on, things were different between us. Better, deeper. We had no more secrets, no more walls between us. We started talking about our future, what we wanted our lives to look like. We talked about adoption, about traveling, about creating our own traditions, our own family, whatever that might mean. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Real, honest hope. Hope for the future. A few months later, we moved in together. We started to find a rhythm in life, one that wasn't dominated by pain, anger, or betrayal. Our weekends were spent exploring new places, trying new hobbies, laughing together in ways I never thought I would again. It wasn't perfect. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but it was real. It was ours. Sometimes, I'd hear about my ex-wife through mutual friends, the ones who were still floating around the edges of our lives, even though I'd cut most ties with them. From what I gathered, things hadn't gone well for her. She had a baby, a little girl, but it sounded like she struggled. She was a single mom, trying to do it all alone, and it wasn't easy. I heard whispers about her turning to alcohol, trying to numb whatever guilt or regret she was carrying. People said she looked different, tired, worn out, a shell of the woman I used to know. I won't lie, hearing those things affected me. I felt anger, pity, and a strange sadness for what could have been. But the anger was gone. The rage that used to keep me up at night, it had faded. What was left was more like acceptance. She made her choices, and I made mine. We both screwed up in different ways. And life, as it always does, moved on. I wished her well in my own way. I hoped she could find peace. I hoped she could be the mother that little girl needed. But that was her path to walk, and I had mine. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I was okay with the fact that we'd gone our separate ways, that our mistakes had led us down different roads. Because those mistakes brought me to Allison, to this second chance at happiness, and I wasn't about to waste it. Now, when I look back on everything, the divorce, the pain, the whole mess, I see it for what it was, a turning point, a chance to learn, to grow, to become better than I was before. And as I sit here, looking at the woman I love, planning a future full of possibilities, I realize that sometimes life breaks you down so you can build yourself back up stronger. And I'm okay with that because I know, whatever comes next, I can face it with Allison by my side. And that's all I need.